Let me just look at it.
There's a phone call.
Whatever. Okay. Okay. Let's see if I can read without my glasses. I hope so. I can't do that. Can't do that. Okay.
That's why you're going to be great, man.
Cool. Thanks.
Yes.
And you will too.
Do I?
Can you start broadcast?
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jonathan Handel, entertainment attorney at the Troy Gould Law Firm here in Los Angeles, and we are talking today about the Screen Actors Guild. The Screen Actors Guild has been in a stalemate for the last 2 months. Their contract expired June 30th, and the negotiations prior to that date were not terribly fruitful. Now, the Screen Actors Guild National Board and also the Hollywood Board is controlled by a faction called Membership First. They've taken a hard line, honestly so have the studios, and we also find ourselves in the middle of the Screen Actors Guild, or SAG, elections, and a challenger slate has arisen this year called Unite for Strength. We're going to have guests from both Membership First and Unite for Strength. We start with Unite for Strength, and in about 1 hour at 2 hours rather, at 4 o'clock, we're going to have a couple of representatives from Membership First. Now, the negotiations, by the way, are about the Screen Actors Guild agreement, about amending that agreement. This agreement is close to 700 pages, as you can see, so it's a very difficult matter to deal with, and there are differences but certainly between the studios and the Screen Actors Guild among the issues to be negotiated, pardon me. So it's not an easy situation. Now, I should tell you that I blog at jhandel.com and also the Huffington Post, although you'll find more information at jhandel.com about all of these issues. Now, I've invited each faction to bring 2 members. Ned has decided to come himself. No implication about that. No implication about the fact that Membership First has brought 2 people. Depending on the timing and how long we go with questions, there will be the opportunity for a question and answer from you. There is a chat room to the right of your video screen, and anything you type there is seen by all the viewers as well as ourselves. Please don't type anything there until I call for questions, because we'll probably ignore it. However, if you have technical problems that you think are not limited to your computer, sound too loud, sound too soft, problems with the video, then please do give us a heads up. We appreciate that. We're monitoring the video. We're not able to monitor the sound actually from here, but any suggestions are helpful. Now, and by the way, as you probably already noticed, the lip sync will probably be off. So that we already know about. We don't need the heads up on that. I'd like to thank my technical producer, Neil Hunt. We wouldn't be able to do this without him. Also, although I am from Troy Gould, the questions I ask, the opinions I express, if any, represent my own opinions. Now, as I say, our first guest is Ned Vaughn, who represents Unite for Strength, a slate of about, I believe, about 31 people. There are 11 seats up and 22 alternate seats up. With no further ado, Ned, I'd like to welcome you to the show. Our show name is Look at LA, and thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's my pleasure. Why don't we start with a little bit, we have a lot to do, but a little bit of background about yourself, and then we'll move into some background about Unite for Strength and its goals.
All right. I am a 21, let's see, I joined Screen Actors Guild in 1986, so yeah, I'm 22 years a member of the Screen Actors Guild. And since that time, I got my first SAG, I got my SAG card by doing a commercial, and did commercials for the first couple of years of my life as a SAG member when I was in New York. Came to Los Angeles after I started doing some movies and television, and that's primarily what I've done ever since then. And you know, like a lot of members, I didn't pay a great deal of attention to union matters for a very long time, but I did start to pay a little bit more attention as there was an attempt, first in 1998 and then especially in 2003, to merge SAG and AFTRA. And by 2003, I was actually a member of both unions. And it struck me that if we didn't get these unions together, that there was going to be the possibility of competition between the two, and that would be something that would be bad for actors, and that's unfortunately coming to pass. And so in talking to fellow SAG members, I found many others who shared my concerns, and they are the 31 candidates of the Unite for Strength slate.
Now, as I say, you're challenging an existing faction. That's pretty tough to do. How's the campaign going? It felt like you got off to a bit of a slow start. Maybe that's just my perception.
Well, it's funny. This is all volunteer work. I mean, both the members who are serving on the board currently, and certainly anybody who's going to challenge them. So all of this campaign, all of the campaigning, and all of the board governance, for that matter, is done in the spare time that none of us seem to have, but we make it happen anyway. And I feel that our campaign is going very well. It's not like a traditional political campaign where you have tracking polls or other really sort of hard evidence of how the voters are responding to your messages, other than the fact that we have just received overwhelmingly large numbers of letters of support and messages, personal messages of great support for what we're doing. So based on that, I feel very confident about our campaign, and I'm very pleased with the way it's going.
Now, we've probably got about half the ballots already returned, isn't that right? So that makes it a bit more difficult as well.
Yeah, it is unusual in that way as well. I was frankly surprised because I'm somebody who is perpetually pushing the deadline, and so I have my SAG ballot on my desk, and I'm saying, oh, what is the date it has to be in? And
you already know who to vote for, though.
No, not this time. Not this time. I've already voted. But I was surprised to find out that a fairly large number of SAG members returned their ballots very quickly. So that's why, it's one of the reasons why I think you saw a lot of messaging from both campaigns before the ballots were even mailed. And then certainly once they hit mailboxes, we want to motivate people to return their ballots marked for us. But that even if you assume that half of the ballots have already been returned, that means that half haven't. Mm-hmm. And we want to fight for every one of those votes. We believe that we have the better argument, and we want to get that message out to SAG members. It's very important to us to let people know what we think are the central issues in this campaign and how we feel about them, and we want them to support us.
How many seats do you need to change control of the board? That would be the national board.
Right. Yeah, the national board sets policy for the Screen Actors Guild.
That's right.
And it's interesting. There's a weighted voting system on the national board. Not all the votes count the same. The regional branch division votes are counted a little bit differently than, say, the Hollywood and the New York votes. But the bottom line is that if we were to unseat, I'd say 6 and certainly 7 of the incumbent membership first board members, that would sufficiently change. That would tip the balance of power on the national board. They have had essentially a virtual lock on the Hollywood division of the Screen Actors Guild. They control 49 of 55 seats there, but on the national board, they have a fairly slim majority, and so 6 or 7 seats could could be a meaningful difference.
Now, I want to ask you, why have you declined membership first's request to enter into a public debate? Right. And in fact, you haven't done a public meet the candidates as well.
Right.
And I know you've said, well, that there are independent candidates who you want to participate in that as well. But when I look at the presidential election, I really am not interested in seeing Ralph Nader in one of those debates. I'm looking for Barack Obama and John McCain, and
right.
Even though I already know which way I'm voting.
Right.
So that said, I mean, this is largely a battle between two slates. Why not a debate?
Well, you partly answered the question there. Unlike a presidential campaign where you have a long series of primaries where all of the candidates are heard from, we have one very short, a compressed election time frame. And we frankly believe that the members deserve to hear from all of the candidates. It's not just there are good ideas all over the Screen Actors Guild, and I'll be frank. You know, there are good ideas, you know, in part that have come from membership first. I just think that the best way for members to find out what they need to know from the various candidates they want to have address those questions is some sort of an event where we could have all the candidates there together. And I actually suggested that to Anne Marie Johnson, one of the spokespeople for Membership First, and she seemed to feel that it was logistically going to be a problem. I mean, we offered to rent a public venue to you know, accommodate sufficient number of people, and I just never heard back from her on that, so I'm not sure why she didn't want to take that up.
Do you have, does Unite for Strength have any existing members of the board?
No, we are...
Boy, that makes it difficult, doesn't it?
Well, it's, you know, certainly there are some advantages of incumbency that we don't enjoy, but on the other hand, I think that the fact that we are bringing fresh eyes and a fresh approach to a board that frankly has been stuck, I think that argues in our favor.
You know, one thing I'm really not so clear about is where do you differ from Membership First on the contract issues, not on the issue of merger with AFTRA, which we'll get to,
right,
but on the contract issues, which really are the most immediate issues here.
Right. Well, it's a little bit impossible to say because we are not on the board. We do not have sitting board members right now. We're not on the negotiating committee. Membership First has board members and negotiating committee members. We are not privy to the exact details of the contract that's been offered. They haven't shared those. So it's hard to say exactly what our position on that contract is. I will say, though, that, you know, we supported the unanimous SAG board resolution, which you know, asserted SAG the commitment of the board to certain core principles. We all make our living as actors, so it is critical to us to get a strong contract for actors. I mean, so to that degree, we don't differ from them. We want the strongest contract possible. Where we differ is how to get it. We feel that you know, presenting a unified front to our employers is the way to get it. And,
well, but we're not going to have a merger in the next 6 weeks, and the question is whether we'll get a contract, you know, in some reasonable period of time. And those core principles that you mentioned are new media principles, and those are exactly what the studios have said are roadblocks. And I also, you know, am not clear on where you say Membership First has not been open about what it's looking for, because I went to a...
Not what it's looking for. Oh, no, they've said very clearly what they're looking for, but what they haven't said clearly is what's on offer.
All right, but are you looking for, in this contract cycle, the same things they're looking for, with lowering the threshold on certain new media jurisdiction, with insisting on residuals in the certain portion of new media where there aren't residuals, in looking for clip consent, looking for clip compensation? You know, there's a litany of issues,
right?
And they've been public about that. Are you looking for the same?
Well, what we are looking for is the strongest possible contract in this scenario. And again, because we're not in the negotiating room, we don't know what that is. We don't know what are the areas of tentative agreement. I mean, you know, negotiation is a fluid thing, and as I say, we just haven't been made privy to those details. If we're fortunate enough to be elected as board members, we'll get a good look at information that we haven't seen heretofore and be able to give you a better answer then.
Well, we know, though, that the new media template is, I mean, we've seen a description of the AFTRA template, we've seen actual contract language on the writers, we've seen a description in some detail as well on the DGA template, and the studios have been quite public that they're not going to change that. Membership First has been quite public that they want changes, they want jurisdiction down to zero threshold. Right. They want residuals for everything in new media. And so I'm asking you, I think the members have a legitimate interest in knowing whether you're looking for those specific things in this contract cycle.
We'd love to have those things. We'd love to have we think that all the original goals of the SAG negotiating team are, these represent gains that we feel all actors deserve.
But are you looking for those in this particular cycle? Because that's
we'll have to ascertain whether those are possible once we get into the negotiating room.
All right, so members are voting on not quite sure whether you're going to.
Yeah, but we have to get first-hand knowledge of what's available in the negotiating room.
And is there any circumstance where you would take the existing studio deal, as to the degree we know the contours and to the degree that it tracks the after deal, without change?
Yeah, well, again, we would need to know the details, and we would need to get, we would need to get better knowledge of what is happening in the room, because as I said, a negotiation is a fluid thing, and even though the producers have said this is our last and best final offer, that things often change beyond that point. If a new board majority is the result of this election, and there may be some new direction from that board majority based on the information that we may have, who knows what kind of improvements could be made. We'll just have to see when we get there.
I think it's probably fair to say that you don't think Membership First has been doing a good job in carrying these negotiations.
That's fair, yeah.
What about the National Executive Director, Doug Allen?
Well, what about him?
Has he been doing a good job?
Well, I certainly have questions about some of the initiatives he's undertaken, both with regard to this contract negotiation and previously. The National Executive Director of SAG takes his direction from the National Board, which sets policy. And insofar as, I think that Membership First, despite good intentions, is misguided on a number of their policy initiatives. Doug Allen may have been reflecting those wishes, and obviously I don't agree with those initiatives, and I think those represent poor choices in some cases.
He's clearly become a flashpoint for the studios at this point, and by the way, for the A-listers and the agents as well. I think both of them feel that in meetings with him that he wasn't respectful, he didn't have a realistic view of their position on issues. Would you fire Doug?
Well, that's not something I could possibly say at this point. We don't have a specific agenda with regard to Doug Allen or any other member of the SAG staff at this point. But as I said, the National Executive Director takes his direction from the National Board, which sets policy. And if a new, if the composition of the board is significantly changed as a result of this election, obviously I would expect that Mr. Allen would want to have a discussion with the board to make sure that we are all on the same page about the best way to proceed going forward, and that's a conversation that we certainly would want to have.
He's been so prominent in taking a hard line and so aggressive with that, and really clearly has become a flashpoint for the studios, just as Nick Counter, the head of the Studio Alliance, is a flashpoint for a lot of union members. Is it really possible, and I think members deserve to know the answer to this and to whether you'd be inclined to fire Doug, is it really possible for him to change enough of his spots that he could be an effective negotiator?
Again, I've said what I need to say about that. We would need to enter into a discussion with Mr. Allen. Again, if the makeup of the board changes sufficiently, we'll have that conversation. We'll see how best to proceed.
Let me move on to something else then. Membership First has controlled the board since 2005, and a predecessor organization called Performers Alliance, right? Performers Alliance, made up of many of the same people.
Yeah.
Has been in existence and been a powerful group for a number of years before that. Played a role in going out on strike on the commercials contract. Played a role in defeating the agreement, the so-called franchise agreement, with the talent agents, which SAG has been without now for 6 years.
Yes.
A bad signal as to how long it might take to get an agreement with studios.
Yeah.
Are actors better off than they were 3 years ago? And if not, and I assume that's probably the answer, why not?
Well, I don't think that actors are better off at all, because I think that we are facing a problem now that has been newly and very substantially elevated just this year, which is this issue of our two unions, SAG and AFTRA, competing against one another. I think that situation did not pop up overnight. This is something that was warned about very, very specifically back in 2003 when the last merger attempt was put in front of members. And a lot of those people from First Performers Alliance and then Membership First, their line at that time was that this couldn't happen, that the Phase 1 agreement would protect against the unions competing against one another. Well, that obviously has not worked out so well in this case, and it was the meltdown of that relationship which has now left us in this situation where actors are facing a problem that, if it's not remedied very quickly, is going to serve to not only put downward pressure on the pay that we get for our work, but it's going to cause a whole host of other problems with regard to the splitting of pension and health contributions and a host of other things. So I think that you know, looking at where we are this moment and going forward, no, we're not better off.
One issue that we do have a pretty clear idea about, both the studios and Membership First, well, about the studio's position, is home video residuals.
Mm-hmm.
That deal is 24 years old. The studios have resisted changing it. They forced the writers to abandon that.
You mean DVD residuals?
Well, DVD residuals now,
Mm-hmm.
that's right. Physical device.
Right.
Back then it was VHS, of course.
Yeah.
SAG was looking to, I believe, double and then get a 50% increase in those residuals, and now is at essentially a 15%. In other words, that the pension and health contributions would be made on DVD residuals as well.
Right.
There's some evidence that Membership First and the SAG itself has dropped that as an issue. Do you think they have, and also what's your position on that?
Well, you know, like all the other goals, original goals of the negotiating committee, we would love to have an increase in DVD residuals. That's something that has been lacking historically, and it's something that we'd like to address. But it is difficult to obtain that in light of the pattern that has been set by the DGA, WGA, and now AFTRA's agreement with AMPTP. You know, you say that there's evidence that they've dropped even the 15% raise that would reflect the pension and health contribution being made by the employer. I don't know that to be the case. It's one of those things that, as I say, we will get a better eye on once we are in a position of being in the boardroom.
Would you abandon it regardless of whether they have?
It's impossible to say without being in the room.
What approach? Pardon me. What approach would you take to negotiations?
A smart one, a strategic one. You know, you want, you know, a negotiation is an interesting thing. I mean, you want somebody who will fight and fight hard, but you also need people who have the proper perspective. I mean, you know, you cannot get everything that you want in a negotiation. It just doesn't happen that way. And you have to be strategic about picking the battles that you can win. You know, you focus your energy in a given negotiation. We are very mindful of that, and it's. I think it's important to go into these negotiations with. Well, it actually goes to the issue. I know you say you want to talk about it later, but it really is kind of our core issue. It's where we draw our name from, Unite for Strength. We believe that the only way for actors to get the best contracts is to present a united front on our side of the negotiating table, just as the AMPTP does. And, you know, looking ahead to the future, which is, after all, the most important thing, we all hope to keep doing this for decades, we need to ensure that actors have the strength that will come from uniting all the faces and voices that fill our employers' airwaves and screens. That's how we get leverage, and that will allow us to pick our battles and win the battles that we pick.
But you won't have that leverage this negotiating cycle.
Yeah, unfortunately not.
So the approach is sort of a realistic one. It sounds like a strategic one. Has Membership First taken that sort of strategic, realistic kind of approach, in your opinion?
Well, let me just say, if they have, I don't understand their strategy. You know, one of the there have been a host of decisions leading up to the negotiation that I just haven't understood. They tried very hard to change the nature of the Phase 1 agreement, And regardless of what you might have thought of the changes that they were asking for, it was clear that their method of going about getting those changes was very antagonistic to AFTRA, and AFTRA let them know that very clearly, and basically let them know that they weren't going to be complying with those changes. And that campaign that sort of ramped up surrounding that against AFTRA ultimately, I think, played a part in a significant part in the ultimate dissolution of the Phase 1 agreement for this negotiation. And I don't think that's strategic at all. I mean, I view that to be the poorest strategy, because it's left SAG alone at the bargaining table and with not nearly the kind of leverage that we should have. There was also the issue of delaying negotiations. That was talked about quite a lot. I certainly believe that the process should have been started sooner, because as we all know, in this town, if you don't either have an agreement or have a very good indication that you're going to be getting an agreement 3 months or so ahead of the contract expiration, work starts to slow down very significantly, and that's exactly what's happened. It's cost our members millions of dollars in lost jobs, and then subsequent to the contract expiration, our members have been working at the old contract terms, and that's cost us millions of dollars more. And it's just not a good strategy to leave your members in a position where they're working less and getting paid less for the work that they'd get.
Well, ironically, actually, until about 2 months before expiration, until about April 30th, or including April 30th, there was actually more feature film work than there was beforehand. The studios were stockpiling features. They have enough features to go through probably summer of next year, people feel. And television work hasn't slowed. How does that, and may not, because of the fact that the studios know that SAG can't strike, and we'll talk about that later, but can't reach the 75% threshold that it needs. In addition, they're talking about upping feature work, ramping up feature work at this point. So are the members really going to be hurt economically by this, or does it just sort of
No, the members have been hurt. But it's certainly my experience and the experience of the members that I've been hearing from. You're right that there is, whenever there is a kind of a labor inflection point in this town, especially with regard to SAG and WGA and DGA, the studios accelerate production for a period to try to accommodate for the possibility that there's going to be a breakdown or a problem. But first of all, we work in a cyclical business in any event, but it never seems to quite it never seems to quite balance out as relative to what would have happened if things were going a little bit more smoothly, a little bit more predictably, and a more constant stream of production remained in place. And plus, it's just in a business that's cyclical already, it becomes a little chaotic when suddenly, you're working a lot, but you can only do so many jobs at a time. You see, I mean, you can't. There may be a lot of work on the table, but wouldn't it be nice if I could do more of it? I can only be in one place at one time.
Sure.
That's part of the problem with those accelerated phases. The members that I've talked to have really been hurting. Yeah, there is a slowdown out there. There's been a significant slowdown, especially in feature film production. Now, I know you mentioned that there's been talk that the studios may increase that work, and we'll see if they do. But over the last several months, it's been quite a lot. There's been quite a lot less of that work than there normally would be.
Let's talk about that bargaining table that you mentioned a minute ago. The negotiating committee sits at that bargaining table. They have power delegated from the national board to do that. Yeah. Membership first made a rules change to the Constitution last year that makes it difficult, really impossible under the numeric situation, even if you won all 11 seats up here, to make a change in that negotiating committee. Isn't that going to stalemate the ability to actually change the negotiating strategy, even, as I say, if you win all the seats you're running for?
Well, the negotiating committee, just as the national executive director, take their direction from the national board. And even though that committee may remain in place, you're going to have consultation between the committee and the board. And if for some reason a negotiating committee weren't taking direction from the board majority, there would probably be some sort of an address to that problem.
Let's talk now about, and what sort of an address actually are you thinking of?
Well, honestly, I can't tell you the answer to that exactly right now. I mean, we'd have to. I think it would depend upon, frankly, how strong the majority was. I mean, if we elect, say, 6 or 7 seats, as we discussed earlier, and the majority, the balance of power shifts to a very small degree, it might be very difficult to address that problem. If, on the other hand, we, win all 11 national board seats and the entire alternate pool, then things become a little more, the mandate for a different direction may become a little bit stronger.
I got to use my legal skills and analyze the Constitution, which was not a pleasant process, a 30-page Constitution.
Yeah.
But what I saw there was that a majority of the board, simply by changing those 6 or 7 seats, could dissolve the negotiating committee and reserve negotiating rights for itself because it's a delegated power. It doesn't take the 2/3 that it takes to replace somebody under certain circumstances. In that extreme case, would you and your majority vote to dissolve the negotiating committee?
Well, as I say, a lot of this just depends on, frankly, the results of the election, and getting a first-hand look at the information we're talking about. I mean, what the negotiating committee is attempting, what's being offered in return, that's just not information I have first-hand knowledge of. Once we get that knowledge, we'll be in a better position to ascertain the best way to proceed. Now, do I personally, or do we as a slate, want to dissolve the current negotiating committee? No, because there is a steep learning curve, frankly, between where they started in this negotiation and where they are now. There's a lot of knowledge that has passed back and forth between them and the AMPTP. And it would be better to utilize that knowledge of this negotiation going forward. But it is critical that the negotiating committee reflect the wishes of the board. And if there were a problem in that regard, an extreme measure might have to be taken. It's not what we'd be looking to do, though.
Let's turn now to another relationship, which you've mentioned several times and is one of the key portions of your slate, which is the relationship with AFTRA.
Right.
Now, for merger to happen at some point, clearly there would have to be some repair of the relationship with AFTRA, which is toxic at this point.
Yeah.
They're in the same building here in LA, and I can't imagine what elevator rides are like. Do people retreat to their corners, like fighters?
Yeah.
How would you go about repairing that relationship and reaching out?
Well, I mean, I think the very fact that we are, I think our election would do a lot of that repair, because we are very openly, but we're not only amenable to, we're promoting the idea that SAG and AFTRA need to be united in a partnership, not divided and at war. That seems to be the stance of Membership First, and so I think to the degree that the election of the Unite for Strength slate would say, well, the membership is maybe viewing this relationship and the need for this relationship to be closer together rather than farther apart, that would help heal things quite a lot right there.
Why move towards merger at this point at all? Merger has failed twice in the last decade, including fairly recently.
Right.
And, well, let me ask that question.
Okay. Well, it's a good one. It's a central one in this election. You're right that the merger attempt in 1998 and in 2003 failed, but it's important to note that in 2003, a strong majority of SAG members approved that.
58%.
Yes, exactly right, 58%. It was just shy of the 60% that was needed to pass it. AFTRA approved it very strongly in both cases. And the reason that we need to do it again, the reason that we need to approach it and get it done in this case, is because of the reality that we're facing. You know, everything that's happening now, this competition, this looming competition between our two unions, the fact that they are negotiating separately our biggest contract for the first time in over a quarter century, and giving our employers the ability to pit one union against the other, that is a new reality. It is what was warned about in 2003, but now that reality is coming home to roost, and it is such, it's a problem of such underlying importance that I do believe that the reality is going to be hitting home to members rather significantly, and they're going to understand that we've got to fix this.
One big issue for the membership first faction in the Phase 1 agreement, which is that 27-year-old agreement to work together that's really dissolved now,
Right.
Has been the idea that AFTRA should only have proportional representation on the Joint Negotiating Committee, rather than 50-50 representation, because AFTRA works far less on this contract. I think maybe only 10% or something on the contract compared to SAG, as measured, I think, by earnings. If there were a merger, would you be looking for proportional representation, or supporting proportional representation, or 50-50? Well,
if there's a merger of the union, that's another great question, because it's something that people tend to overlook. You know, one of Membership First's chief objections to merger is the fact that AFTRA also represents broadcasters and recording artists, and they feel for some reason that broadcasters and recording artists do not belong in the same union with actors. But it's critical to point out that in the newly merged union, well, there are 44,000 actors who are members of both the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA. And so if you merge those two unions, you have a total membership now of 146,000 members. That's 120,000 SAG members, and then the remaining 26,000 AFTRA members who are not already SAG members. So that SAG actors represent an 82% supermajority of this new merged union. And that merged union is going to elect a new leadership. And so the idea that there's going to be AFTRA leaders, or that there needs to be proportional representation of AFTRA in the... If there were proportional representation of AFTRA in such a union, SAG would have nothing to worry about, because it's overwhelmingly dominant in terms of the numbers.
But AFTRA's not going to let that happen for that reason.
Well, there's not... Again,
they're not going to allow themselves to be extinguished.
A merger extinguishes both unions, in effect. You see, I mean, so a merger creates a new union, which would represent, which would elect its a new leadership.
But with 82% dominance by the former SAG people, as you just said, why is AFTRA going to say, we'll accept a situation where we've only got 18% of our former?
For two reasons. First of all, because if they understand those who support... listen, I'm sure that there are some within AFTRA who don't support merger. But I know for a fact, because I've spoken with many friends who are on the board of AFTRA, that there is strong support still for AFTRA. And as I said, they passed it strongly in both the previous attempts. They understand, as we do, that the only way to protect ourselves going forward is to create this merger. We have to have a united front on our side of the bargaining table. That's the compelling reason that would drive anyone to merger. But secondarily, you got to remember, I said there are 44,000 members of AFTRA are already SAG members. I mean, it's not as if they're suddenly going to feel like, oh, I'm being overtaken by this strange beast. They're already members of SAG.
One of the concerns that Membership First has expressed about AFTRA is that several of the AFTRA contracts, or several AFTRA provisions, are not as favorable to actors as SAG provisions. In particular, basic cable, the residuals, the minimums that are set, and of course a lot of people are being driven towards scale plus 10, so that's a real concern.
Right.
And also some of the pension and health percentages of crediting, I think particularly on the pension side perhaps. If there was a merger, would the SAG better SAG conditions on these two areas be watered down somewhat to a compromise between the SAG and AFTRA positions?
No, it's just the reverse. By combining our strength, by getting the real leverage that would result from combining our strength, we can actually get a better deal than either union can have separately. So we can actually get the strongest terms, stronger than even the SAG terms, by presenting a unified front on our side of the bargaining table, depriving the producers the ability to create competition between the two unions.
There's always the possibility that merger would fail. What do you do if merger fails? Do you try again? Do you resign yourself to this competitive situation where AFTRA is trying to gain market share, is certainly one of their motivations, and where the studios have the ability to play one union off the other?
Well, I don't think there's any such thing as resignation to the idea that the unions would compete, because that's a disaster. If the unions compete, the prices we get for our work are going to go down. Our pension and health contributions are going to be split between two unions. It's funny you mentioned pension and health, so I want to say something here, because it's a key. It's one of the key reasons, and it's one that hits home for me personally. I don't think it needs to. I have, as I've told you previously, I have 5 children, and the only way I support those kids and get them to the doctor and do all the things that one needs to do to support a family is through these SAG contracts, and I also do work with AFTRA as a voiceover performer, but. If these unions remain separate, what we're going to get is a situation where, you mentioned that AFTRA does a smaller amount of the work, but it's rapidly increasing. As AFTRA is organizing new pilots this year, and I predict that if the unions remain separate, it's going to continue to trend in the direction where the work is divided more, not less. And that is the situation that is so deadly for actors, not only from the competition standpoint, where it depresses prices, but because you're going to get a situation where an actor can work enough here under some SAG jobs and then work enough here under some AFTRA jobs, maybe to make enough to pay the bills, but not making a sufficient amount to qualify for pension credit or health benefits in either union. And that is just a disaster. The idea that, a huge part of the reason that we're in unions to begin with is to secure those benefits. It's a big, big part of why we do this. And, the idea that those benefits would be jeopardized because our unions are competing and they're separate, that my ability to secure them would be jeopardized, that's just something that can't allow to happen.
We've been talking about competition as though it was simply between SAG and AFTRA, but really it's between the SAG Hollywood branch, really the Membership First folks, and on the other hand, the New York branch and the so-called regional branch divisions, the board members who represent SAG members around the country.
Right.
How would you repair the relationship with New York and the RBDs?
Well, I think that to the degree that a lot of the, we actually have a good amount of support from the New York board members that we've spoken to, and to the regional branch division directors, because we not only feel that they typically support the idea of merger as well, but also we feel that SAG must retain a strong presence as a national union, especially in light of the fact that lots of states in this country are offering tax incentives to productions, and I know that I did a film earlier this year in Boston, and there were 8 films in production in Boston at the time because Massachusetts is offering a high degree of tax incentives. I know that several television series are shooting in New Mexico right now. There's always a lot of production down in North Carolina, and so on and so forth,
and not in California.
And not in California. And because they're they're right-to-work states throughout the nation, it's very important that we retain a strong national presence so that we can capitalize on any ability to inject a union presence into any production that we can.
Isn't that an area, though, where SAG itself, once again, would be divided regionally? Because if you do lobby and take efforts to get the legislature and or the governor, whoever you view as the roadblock, or both, to pass incentives in California, you're once again disadvantaging the RBDs in New York by becoming more competitive at the state level. Isn't that an area where SAG would be divided?
Well, you know, the memberships of both New York and the regional boards certainly would want to try to do what they can to increase work in their regions, but you know, we can't forget the obvious fact is that the center of film production in this country, really in the world, is Hollywood, and so we are mindful of the fact that, you know, it would be compelling, because a lot of that work is migrating out of Hollywood. We want to, you know, at least stem that flow, you know.
But so you really would be divided geographically. I mean, if I'm a New York board member, I'm not going to say, oh, gee, let's make California more competitive and I'll lose some of what I've gained. Fewer series will try to migrate the way a few have. Let me just help the Hollywood guys and disadvantage myself. I'm not going to say that if I'm a New York board member.
Well, and listen, the fact is that even if that were an issue where Membership First and Unite for Strength ended up taking the same position on the balance of the other issues, on merger, on our desire to try to negotiate a new agreement with our talent agents, and several others, they are, I think, frankly, more in sync with us. So I don't. You know, I want their support, and I hope to have their support. And again, you know, how we would pursue issues regarding, you know, competition between the various regions of the Screen Actors Guild. That's something that we can address more fully once we get into the boardroom.
So when you mention working together with Membership First on this particular issue, even if not on a number of others, how do you restore harmony within the Guild, particularly the Hollywood branch, and how do you go about reaching out to some people, some of whom have been really vituperative and very personal in their opposition to you? How do you repair that relationship or build one? Well,
listen, you know, you're right that there's been some awfully hot rhetoric introduced into this thing. I mean, it's been prior to us emerging as a slate, and certainly since we've emerged as a slate. I don't take any of it personally, frankly, because I know that what my personal goals are, and I know that the goals of our candidates are simply to get the strongest possible conditions in both pay, benefits, working conditions for actors. I know that I'm a good unionist. So if somebody from the other side wants to take issue with that, they're welcome to, but I know the truth. Now, I believe that, you know, I know a lot of people in the Membership First organization, and I have respect. I have great respect for their service. I mean, they really have spent a lot of time and energy trying to direct the Screen Actors Guild, and that's great. And as I said, nobody gets paid for it, but I think that they've taken a wrong direction. They want the same things that we want. They want strong contracts for actors, and on that we agree. I just think that their approach is dead wrong. And you know, in terms of you know, trying to heal the division there within the Screen Actors Guild, I have to say that I think that a big part of that is going to come from, well, we're going to see how the membership weighs in on this election, and my experience of what membership is telling me and the other candidates in our slate is that they are deeply, deeply concerned about this division with AFTRA. They understand what it portends for the future, and I think that if that's reflected in the election results, I have a feeling that some of those who are most rigidly opposed to that kind of idea within the Membership First organization, they're going to hear some different things coming from the membership. I think it's going to kind of be a watershed election, and you know, when the members speak, Membership First will listen to them, especially if they speak loudly.
One of the things that Membership First has criticized Unite for Strength on is so-called affected voting or qualified voting.
Yeah.
Now, that's something that many of the people who are now on the Unite for Strength slate, including yourself and your strongest partner deputy among the slate, were very strongly in support of, and it would have taken away the vote on strike and on approving a contract.
Actually, not strike authorization.
Not strike authorization, only on approving the contract.
That's right.
And by the way, not on voting for board members.
That's
also,
right,
just to be clear about that. But it would have taken away the vote of a lot of people. And what you said at the time was, we believe very strongly in this, and when that was defeated by the existing board, you said, we will not stop fighting for this.
Right.
Now you've said, this isn't part of our slate, and it may not be part of your platform. It may not be part of your platform, but the question is it something that you as individuals will continue to work for on the board? And by the way, the website that you set up for this organization still exists, still has lots of names on it, including your name and your partner's, slate partner's name, and probably the names of a lot of, or a number of the slate members.
Well, that's right. So, and it also, by the way, included the name of one of the Membership First candidates.
But she's repudiated it.
No. Clancy Brown, who's one of their candidates, he was a signator to the list. And he asked to have his name removed after he filed his petition to become a candidate. The reason we've left the site up, frankly, is because it's an issue that's been much discussed, and we frankly don't want to have charges that we're hiding from this. So why did their site go away? You know, it's a historical document. It's there, and we're not running from the fact that, in fact, yes, several members of the slate were strong supporters of that proposal. Are
they still?
Well, not in light of what's happening, and here's why. And it's critical. And what happened? That proposal was designed at a time. It was conceived before this rupture in the relationship with AFTRA. And it's a little bit like if a doctor is treating somebody's ingrown toenail and then the patient starts having a heart attack. If that doctor continues to focus on the hangnail, the patient's going to die, and that's a big, big problem. When the Phase 1 agreement ruptured, that not only created some results that have been very obviously problematic for Guild members because of what's done to the TV theatrical negotiation, but it radically changed the priorities of anybody whose chief goal is strong union representation for actors, and that is what we are all about. And so this issue of addressing this fractured relationship between SAG and AFTRA, that supersedes all others by several orders of magnitude, because if you don't address that, that does underlie every other issue, and if you don't address it, frankly, you're only doing half as good as you could.
Okay, but
probably not even that.
But once the heart attack gets dealt with, you get your injections, you finally stop eating fatty foods and start running on that treadmill that we all should if we're not. That ingrown toenail still is an issue, and you get that dealt with. So does that mean that if merger succeeds, that once merger is dealt with, that you're going to go back to supporting qualified or affected voting? Well,
here's what we've done. We've taken a pledge that as SAG board members, we will not. I mean, we there's been so much inflammatory and frankly disingenuous rhetoric from the other side that we finally decided, okay, we've got to just set the record straight, and we made this pledge that we are not going to pursue affected member voting. We're not going to we're not going to take any action as board members to deprive any member the right to vote on contracts or any other SAG matter. And
so you're done with affected and qualified voting. Even when the merger is over, you're done with the issue.
The merger is such it's a gigantic issue. I mean, all our energies are going to be focused on that. Obviously we will, as board members, we will have to focus on resolving the TV theatrical contract. The commercials contract is coming up. You know, it's in 2 months it expires.
Unless it gets extended. Which is,
unless.
But yeah, it's still
there
an immediate issue.
There are plenty of other issues that we'll need to deal with. Taking on merger in light of those, that's plenty, and that's all we're focusing on. And we realize that, look, the affected member voting proposal, even though it came out of something that's in SAG's Constitution, out of language that's in SAG's Constitution, it's a contentious issue. We understand that, and that you know, getting the issue of merger addressed is going to require building broad member support. And so to pursue that right now could get in the way of that. So we're just not going to do it.
So to pursue that right now, does that mean there's a possibility you'll pursue it later?
I have no idea what what the elected membership of a newly merged union will do with it, but I can tell you this. If you offered me right now the choice between a merged union that had no affected member or qualified voting of any kind, or two separate unions that have all the qualified voting I could possibly want, I'll take the merged union any day. And I think that says it about as clearly as I can.
Fair enough. Let's talk about an issue where you and membership first may be in somewhat greater agreement, but an issue that's very important to the future of this union and of all the unions in Hollywood, and that is the relationship between unions and between the industry, the entertainment industry here in Hollywood, using that metaphorically, and Silicon Valley. Because what's happening is that content is under a lot of pressure. It's become very difficult. Prices for actors are being driven down. All these things, and meanwhile, the new media distribution networks. Now the old media distribution networks, of course, were controlled by the studios, television, theatrical. Of course, those are separate chains, but they effectively were controlled by an existing industry. Cable, home video was directly controlled by the studios. But the new media distribution technologies are controlled by YouTube and uStream, which you're watching now. Hollywood should have created YouTube, should have created uStream. There was nothing but wedding videos that mattered for entertainment other than Hollywood product. That's changed now. People spend a lot of time doing other things. How do you, and by the way, there are a number of difficulties Hollywood has. One of them is inflated star salaries, which is a difficult issue within a union because you've got great economic differences that most unions don't have outside of entertainment and sports. And you do have inflated executive salaries, but you've also got an overhang and a cost imposed by unions. You've got almost 2,000 pages of union agreements like this one. When you add up 3 unions worth of agreements, you've got working rules that you don't have in Silicon Valley. In Silicon Valley, people work through lunch. In this town, absent one of the changes that the studios may be looking for, you don't work through lunch, and there are meal penalties if you do, on and on. How do you deal with this? How do you maintain the integrity of unions in particular and the industry as a whole when you've got these challenges from an industry that evolves much more quickly, Silicon Valley?
Well, I mean, listen, this is a whole basket of changes that have, seriously impacted the entire entertainment industry. I mean, we only have to look at what happened with the music industry and MP3s, etc. It's something that we've got to address. I personally think that there is a great possibility with regard to really streamlining the way that the Screen Actors Guild and certainly any successor merged union would do business with exactly the kind of people you're talking about. I mean, the cost of production, the cost of physical production has gone way down. You used to have to, rent big expensive film cameras and dollies and lights and the whole package, and it cost millions and millions of dollars to create anything saleable. Now you can, well, I mean, we're doing it right here in your home office.
But the cost of Hollywood movies has actually gone way up and has increased, even though theatrical admissions are flat, DVDs declining.
But there's a whole new tier of product that is saleable or nearly saleable that's emerged, and that is not trending downward, it's trending upward. And so it's important that the unions take great note of that and perhaps streamline the way they operate so that up-and-comers, these entrepreneurs who live not in Hollywood or New York, but who live in the middle of Oklahoma or Missouri or in Michigan,
or Alabama.
Or Alabama, good old Alabama.
Where you're from.
Exactly right. Wherever they are, that we have an ability to bring them into the union fold. But where I don't know where you put the contract, but you say that massive contract, even if it's, I'm not talking about some 14-year-old kid in the basement, but even if it's a legitimate startup company, that has some real revenues, but is still limited in scope, they don't have teams of attorneys to go through an 800-page document to make sure, gosh, what am I signing on to here?
Unless they hire me.
Well, there you go. I'm drumming up business for you. But I think we do need to pay attention to the idea that we can create something that will scale into those larger agreements should the revenue stream justify it. But we want to get them from the ground up. I mean, that's a great revenue builder in the future for the unions. But what is critical, as I keep going back to it because, as I said, it underlies everything. The best way to do this is with the strength that will come through unifying the two unions. That's the way. If you create the competition scenario where one union will finally say, well, you know what? Let's get those guys. We want to get those guys away from these guys, so we'll give them a little bit lower price. That's a nightmare for actors. It can't be allowed to continue, and I just don't see how Membership First's stance of continuing to fight with AFTRA helps achieve that goal. It drives the unions farther apart, and it's a huge problem.
But if you want to maintain prices or increase prices for these entrepreneurial ventures, you even with a merged union, and by the way, what would a merged union be called? SAG, AFTRA, something different?
I've said a number of times. I mean, who knows? We'll see. We'll vote on it. But
what name are you looking for?
Uncle Joe's Actor Union would do for me.
I don't have the SAG brand name that way.
Listen. I say that somewhat kiddingly. I value the history of SAG. It's a union with a rich and storied history. It's a great union that I've been very proud to be a member of, and it's served me very well. But what I care about more even than SAG's history is the future for working actors going forward. And the only way to protect it is to create a new union. And again, I think the name matters very much less than the leverage that we get from combining the two.
But you still have problems competing, getting entrepreneurs to sign on when they've got a choice of a 24-year-old with a bunch of college credits who might act well versus a SAG-AFTRA, SAG-AFTRA member who's going to be more pricey in terms of direct cost and is also going to come with a whole bunch of administrative requirements, reporting and this and that, and the fear of what might be in that agreement, however long it might be, and meal penalties, all of that. How does even a merged union compete effectively with non-union talent?
Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, there's always going to be some threshold below which there are always going to be people who are going to choose not to go union. What you have to work out in the marketplace is, will they be able to create a product that is as saleable, as is in demand by the public, as that which is created by the union, by the unions. And that's why it's important to widen that net as far as we possibly can, to get a greater scope of those who want to do this sort of work under the union umbrella, because that diminishes the size of those outside it.
Now, the lack of jurisdiction for new media has an exception, a carve-out, when there's a covered performer. So even if it's above, even if the original production is above what is a kind of an absurdly high threshold level, there's this carve-out that says, oh, by the way, if you do use a SAG member with a couple credits, or even an actors or an AFTRA member, or even an actors equity member who's acted nationally or regionally, at least in certain touring companies, etc., that you've got to go union. So that said, why does that threshold matter so much to people? The 20, and just to explain, most new media production is at the level of $2,000 to $5,000 per minute, sometimes ranging up to $10,000, not so often. But the threshold that was agreed to in the template by the DGA and adopted by the writers and AFTRA in 2 separate agreements, daytime and primetime television, is $25,000, which of course is very high. There are almost no productions that would meet that threshold. But there is this carve-out that says if you hire a union member who has, a couple of credits in TV or film, or these other credits, that everyone on that production, or all the actors, will be covered anyway. So why do people, both in Membership First and you guys, because you're supporting that aspect of the changes they want and the board unanimously wants, why does the $25,000 even matter?
Well, I'm sorry. Could you just restate the question back to me without the explanation?
Sure. There's a.
I know about the threshold.
So why does that threshold even matter, given that there's a?
The covered performer. I'm sorry. Yes.
Right, the covered performer.
Okay. Well, it matters because you can do a production without a covered performer.
Right, but you can always go non-union, as you've said.
Right.
So the only kind of production that you could do that's ought to be union but isn't is with somebody who has only, a SAG member, let's say, who has only one theatrical or television credit. If they've got 2, then you're covered. Then you've got union jurisdiction. If you have 0, then someone is electing to go with 24-year-olds with college credits.
Right, exactly.
Listen. So why does the issue of, well, there's this small area where you've got people with 1 credit that can be dealt with non-union? Why does that really matter?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I rather doubt that producers are going to be cutting it so fine as to make sure, hey, you've only got 1 credit, right? I mean, that's
my point. So why does the $25,000 matter? Because if they don't cut it so closely, they either go to 2 credits and they're forced to take union regardless. And if they go to 0, then they've made a decision that they're going to be completely non-union. So why does $25,000 make a difference if they're not cutting it closely on covered performers?
Well, again, because they can choose to use no covered performers, and the whole point is that obviously the optimal solution would be for the unions to cover this work down to $0. That's what the SAG negotiators are hoping to get. I would love to have it. I don't know if it's going to be attainable, especially in light of the fact that the AFTRA agreement has allowed for that threshold along with the pattern. It goes back to the point where I think that the way to get that and all the other great things that we need to get for actors to make a decent living is to combine the unions and increase our leverage. But another thing that's important to mention about this issue of new media is that even though it's clear to everyone that this is going to be a money-making venture down the line, and it's important for us to set up some standards that take that into account at this point. I think sometimes too much can be made of the idea that this contract, this contract that we set this time is going to inform the rest of history. I mean, this is probably going to be sorted out over 2 or 3 contract cycles because the technology continues to change.
But in terms of the existing technology, I mean, you do have the fact that these contracts are sort of like roach motels. Contract clauses check in, but they don't check out. That's part of why you've got unreadable contracts.
That's right, they do, except that, again, a newly merged union would not only be coming to the table with much greater leverage, but would be writing new contracts.
Because they'd have the ability to push on that.
That's absolutely right.
Let me ask about one last issue, then we will go to Q&A. And by the way, there are a whole bunch of other issues. Product integration, clip consent, clip compensation. There are no minimums in the AFTRA deal, which I happen to believe is really a problem. A union ought to be setting minimums. Force majeure, we don't have time to explain that. French meals, some of you know what that is. And mileage reimbursement. What is the importance, though, to ask about a different issue that hasn't been prominent, but I think is important? What is the importance of expiration date of this contract and of maintaining the existing expiration date?
Oh, I mean, getting the contracts to be coterminous.
Which contracts?
Well, all of the contracts ultimately, but especially the major contracts. But the TV theatrical contract is the biggest contract of the Screen Actors Guild.
Well, I mean, getting it coterminous with what other union?
With the Writers Guild, with DGA, especially those three unions. If you had contracts coterminous, that not only increases. I mean, you can increase the leverage of the actor component there. By merging SAG and AFTRA, and that's a great and vital thing, and it's what we want to do. But if you combine that with getting the agreements to terminate within narrow time frames or on the same day, that's how you can really have a kind of leverage that the town hasn't seen heretofore.
Right now, the SAG contract would expire, if it stayed on the same date, June 30th. Of 2011. The Writers Guild agreement expires May 1st. The DGA agreement, in my opinion, is less important because they basically have never striked in their whole history. The Writers Guild, of course, is willing. And so the issue here, it seems to me, is that if you have the possibility of a SAG and Writers Guild strike simultaneously, even without a merger with AFTRA, you've increased leverage.
Well, you have, but you haven't increased it nearly enough because you would still have this situation where SAG and AFTRA would be competing without a merger.
Right.
And that's going to be a big problem.
Let me go, let me just take 5 minutes at most of question and answer. And in terms of that, I'd ask people to stop commenting between themselves, which I know has been going on, so that this is clear. And if you've got questions, I'll read them with my glasses on and try to answer a few. So any questions? Question. Good question. Why did the Writers Guild strike without waiting for SAG?
I'm not sure. I just don't know the answer to that.
How would you work to, well, if the expiration dates coincided, that's one thing. If this contract drags on for months and months, the studios have a better and better argument to say, these are 3-year contracts, we're not going to give you June 30th anymore. I guess the question is, how would you persuade the Writers Guild if that happened to go ahead and once again
get an extension? Yeah.
Well, not get an extension from the studios, but simply say we'll work without a contract for 6 months because the SAG date was pushed 6 months, and then we've got our joint threat.
Well, again, I mean, it's
you've got to build relationships with the Writers Guild.
That's absolutely it. I mean, we are chiefly about more unity between performers and writers and directors. I mean, that is, it's clear to me and clear to our slate that it's that unity which gives you real strength at the bargaining table. And I think that we can make that argument convincingly to the writers.
Do you think at some point there ought to be a merged union with Actors Equity and ultimately a merged union as Canada has, I think, ACTRA, with the writers and directors? Maybe even the IA, but maybe just above the line.
Listen, I frankly would be happy to have all the employees. Look,
the studios have all the employers.
Exactly right. I mean, that's just it. Our employers, this is one where we could really take a cue from our employers, because our employers are these 6 gigantic media conglomerates who are smart enough. You don't see, they band together as one entity, the AMPTP. The person on the other side of the negotiating table, representing all of them, is Nick Counter. And you don't see a situation where, Disney, ABC Disney is saying, oh, we don't like that Viacom because they sell billboards. So
well,
they're not a real, yes, but they don't show it at the bargaining table. Nick Counter is sitting there for them. That's what we have to achieve on the employee side of this equation. And the more unity we have among all the employees that they count on to produce their product, the more leverage we have. And that's what we're all about.
Just to add to that, there are actually 8 members of the AMPTP because CBS and MGM, for basically historical reasons, are members. And then the way things work is that the smaller producers who don't have a seat at the table and are not necessarily always happy about that sign on to these guild agreements, and so you do end up not just with the major employers in town banding together, but in fact with virtually all the employers of significance in this town.
Yeah.
Let me take, well, we don't really have much time left. You know, on the method, are you personally satisfied with the after deal, and separately, how long will the merger with after take?
The after deal, I think some components of it are quite good, and others, frankly, I wish we'd gotten a stronger deal. You know, the point is, for me and for our slate, we don't believe that there should be a separate after deal. The whole point is to fold things in together.
I understand that, but how long would a merger take? And also, given that it would take longer than the contract cycle, how do you increase leverage during this cycle?
Well, I don't know that it would take longer than the contract cycle.
Well, it's not going to happen in a month or two.
Oh, well, for this contract, no.
I mean, for the negotiation.
Yeah, right. But in terms of how it is our goal to have a merger completed by the next time the TV theatrical contract.
I understand that, but how do you
negotiated.
increase leverage in this negotiation?
Well, it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, last question, really quickly. Can actors trust their agents now with the large agencies, and how do you, without a franchise agreement, how do you deal with some of the issues there? And
well,
then they have to go.
That's quite all right. Listen, the agency situation is one that really needs to be addressed, and it's a shame that we lost the franchise with our agencies, and that I frankly feel that the 2002 renegotiation of that agreement should have been passed. That's something that Membership First advised members not to accept, and ever since then, for 6 years...
Pardon me for interrupting, because we're short. How do you deal with the relationship with the agents now? Because again, you know, franchise agreement's not going to be instant.
you have to have a willingness to go to the table and negotiate, and we've seen precious little evidence of that from Membership First. You know, there was this proposal when Doug Allen was first hired. One of his first initiatives was to perhaps promulgate an agreement on our agents and say, this is it. This is the way you're going to do it. That didn't work out so well, and in fact it further alienated SAG's relationship with agents. You need people who are going to get in there, be strategic, have a willingness to come to the table and hammer out an agreement that can be mutually satisfactory, so we all benefit going forward.
Two quick questions, actually. One is Membership First, or SAG is the governing folks of SAG, say that negotiations are actually continuing now. Most people in town don't believe that. Yeah. Do you?
I don't know whom to believe, but it's distressing that we're getting different signals from both sides.
Do you know the two heads of AFTRA personally, and how was the relationship with them?
Yeah, I've certainly met them on several occasions at union functions and meetings with regard to various issues. I like them personally, and in terms of dealing with them as potential partners, I look forward to the chance, because I think that issue of bringing us together is critical.
Let me finally just acknowledge the hard work that you guys are doing not on the board yet, at least, depending, but in running for the board, and the hard work of board membership that you're showing a willingness to do. That's something that unions depend on. It's extremely important. And I want to thank you for appearing, and also to remind people to tune in again at 4 o'clock to talk to two of the leaders of Membership First. Thanks very much.
Jonathan, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. And you can stop.